wanted to be in charge of where I was going, and so I wanted to be able to get myself to the stores. I felt very confident about this, and this year was the last year they let me do it because I managed to get myself lost. It's not my fault. I was on the East Coast. I had never driven the East Coast before. I'd done the West Coast tour for many years. For like my first 3 years on tour, what we did is it was Dave and me, and sometimes Lee Modisett. We would hop in a car and we would drive up the coast. And do signings just all the way up the coast, and then we would wrap back around down into Utah. And it was really fun. It was the road trip thing. It was the way we pitched to the editors that they could send, or the publisher, they could send us on tour for kind of a minimal expense. They gave us a budget, and then we did it ourselves. I started to my profile started to raise a bit, and the publisher wanted me to do the East Coast. I'm like, let me rent a car and go do this. They reluctantly agreed. Now, here's the problem. I went through security to fly out there, and I'd left a knife in my backpack. It was a steak knife I had been out doing, so I got on a picnic with my family, and so I have this steak knife in my backpack, and I go through security. Alarms and klaxons go off, and they pull out guns and surround me, and no, they didn't do that, but they pulled out the knife, and it was like, can you imagine? I don't know if that's happened to you before. You leave like the water bottle in, you just flip out. You're like, oh no, they're gonna incarcerate me. I'm like, I'm famous. Please don't do this. And so what had happened is they were actually very good about it. They threw away the knife, but I grabbed my things and I had the two bins. Right, my laptop was by itself in the bottom one, like they asked, and I stacked the bins, and I went off and I got everything out and left my laptop in the bottom of this thing. Now this was not a major problem as you might think it might be, because I had my brother-in-law go pick it up. I realized it was gone, but the phone cord I brought to charge my phone plugged into my laptop. And here I am on a book tour without a phone cord. My phone dies on me. It's my GPS. It's all of my phone numbers and all of this stuff, and I thought I can do this without a phone. How long did I live with no phone? I don't need that. I was immediately lost. It was like I'm trying to get to Pittsburgh, and I'm in Montana or something like that. Like really, I am so lost, and I can't call anybody because I don't remember their numbers. Because now that I have a phone, I don't remember or write down people's phone numbers, right? And so I'm trying to get there. My agent is in Pittsburgh waiting for me, but I can't call him and tell him I think I'm going to be late. It's this big deal. I'm like lost somewhere in the woods. There's like a guy with buck teeth playing the banjo on the side of the road. I'm just like, and I'm stressed out, and someone cut me off in traffic. I'm a pretty even-keel guy. I don't normally have a temper, but in that moment, when that person went right in front of me, I had this immediate reaction where I said, you are lucky I don't have superpowers, because I would blow your car up. Right now. Just boom! And I actually imagined it, right? Fantasy writer. It's very vivid. It's like Michael Bay-esque explosions. Boom, boom, boom. It's flipping end over end in my mind. It's quite nice special effect. But then, in that moment, I was actually horrified. Because, like many of us who like science fiction and fantasy, I had imagined what it would be like to gain these powers, Who doesn't grow up reading these books thinking, wow, I'd like a dragon? Or, what if I had the will and the word? What would I do? All of these wonderful things. And in that moment, I had a glimpse of what might happen. And I might use it to blow up cars that cut me off in traffic. Now, anything that evokes a strong emotion in me as a writer, I try to turn into a book. It's what we do. And so immediately after my thought and my feeling of horror and mortification, that was immediately followed by a sense of, ooh, this will make a book. And so instead of worrying about being late to my signing, I spent the next 2 hours driving to Pittsburgh imagining a story. And I imagined a story where what would happen. I started asking myself, these what-ifs that drive us to write science fiction and fantasy. What would happen if? What would happen if people started gaining superpowers? What would we do if these people wanted to take things from us? What if we couldn't stop them? What do we do? Do you throw Superman in prison? You can't, right? You have to just, if he's not nice, we're all in trouble. you can't lock him up. The guns don't work against him. And so I came up with this idea that anybody you run into could be one of these. I called them epics. Could be somebody who could just destroy you with a thought. And the government passed what I call the Capitulation Act, where they're like, we can't do anything. It's like trying to pass a law that says a hurricane can't blow, right? It just doesn't work. Well, we can't stop these people. So take out insurance against supervillains, because that's the only thing we can suggest. This was really a cool idea for me. I wanted to write a story about this. And I got to the signing and I ran to my agent. I'm like, I've got this story. Let me tell you about this story. I need to write this story. He was used to me by this point. And my accidental books. I kind of sometimes accidentally write books, and I'm not supposed to. The first of these was Alcatraz versus Evil Librarians, where I just called up my agent and I said, surprise, I've got a book for you. And he's like, aren't you supposed to be writing this? Yeah, I was, but now I've got this other book for you. The Arithmetist was one of those too. It just, and so I said, I've got this book. He's like, you are thinking of accidentally writing a book, aren't you? I said, maybe. To which his response was, did you not just promise 30 million Wheel of Time fans that you would write their book for them? And didn't you just go to Tom Doherty and pitch him the Stormlight Archive, which you've been telling me for years you want to write? And I said, yes. He said, so when are you going to write this book? And it became this thing in my head. When am I going to write this book? I love epic fantasy. It's my first love. It's what I always want to be doing. But the way I work as a writer, anytime I finish something, my first instinct is to write something very different from it. I have to cleanse the palette, right? I can't just go from one big book to another big book, or I'll start the other big book burned out on it. And I'd start to figure out my process. The real reason the Alcatraz books popped out is they came out in between Mistborn novels, where I'm like, I can't go into the next Mistborn novel being burned out on a series. I have to do something different and refreshing. And then get back to this series, which I truly love and I truly want to write. I've got to have a break. And so, over the next few years, Steelheart became part of my break. I would write little scenes of it in between sections when I turn in parts of the Wheel of Time, in the back of my head, knowing that eventually I'd be able to release this book that I had this great idea about, that I was so excited about. And I would be able to, I kind of made it my prize to myself that I would release the novel when I had the Wheel of Time done. It developed into this story about a young man who wanted whose father had been killed by the Emperor of Chicago. I just love saying that line, right? His father was killed by the Emperor of Chicago. It's one of those great those lines that you come up with as a writer, where it immediately strikes a disharmony in the reader. Like, what is the first line of 1984? The clocks are striking 13. Lines like that you just read and you're like, wow, something is different here. That's one of the things we look for as writers, is if you can somehow convey in a very few lines, something is different. So this was one of those differences that got me. You all can get this book now. I've finally been able to release it. I'm super excited. We're actually sitting at #1 on the New York Times list right now. And so that's very happy. And if you don't have one, the Barnes & Noble editions are actually exclusive editions. They have a different edition from everyone else. Theirs has an annotated chapter in the back, where it's the prologue done again, but with annotations by me. So it's pretty cool. But I'm actually not going to read to you from that book, which sometimes annoys my agent, because he's like, you should read to people from books they can buy. But I figure if you can buy the book, you can go read it on your own. When I do readings, if you've come to them before, you're used to this, I like to read things that you can't buy yet. So that when you come to one of my readings, you get something cool, something different. And so I'm actually going to do a reading from Words of Radiance, which is... So we will do a short reading from Words of Radiance, and then we will do a Q&A, so be thinking of questions to occupy me. And then from there, I will probably end with another short reading from something else. Picking a scene from Words of Radiance to read has actually been a little bit difficult because I don't want to spoil the first book, The Way of Kings, for those who haven't read it. And so some of the most dynamic scenes are also huge spoilers. So instead, I'm going to read from a scene which I think is quite fun, but it comes from the prologue. The prologues of the first 5 books of the Stormlight Archive, I actually plotted out all happening on the same day. And so in the prologue of the first book, there is an assassin who shows up in the city, and something very dramatic happens with him. We are going to see someone else's viewpoint on that same night in the prologue here. And so I will begin reading this, and this is from the viewpoint of Jasna. The sound of drums thrummed down through the ceiling. Rock and wood blocked the specifics. It sounded like a distant rainfall. The vivacious thrumming made the very stones of the Kholinar palace seem to vibrate. Jasna Kholin glanced upward toward the music, pleased to have extricated herself from the festivities so quickly. Let her uncle and the others drink themselves to oblivion. The treaty with the Parshendi had been signed, and that was all that she cared about. Jasna turned back to the woman seated across the table from her. Then she set a small envelope, sealed with weevil wax, before herself. Jasna set 2 fingers on it, considering, then slid it across the table. The woman, Liz, picked it up and made it vanish into the bust of her low-cut maid's dress. An odd night, Brightness, the woman said, to be engaging in treason. I am hiring you to watch only, Jasna said. Pardon, Brightness, but one does not commonly hire an assassin to watch only. Jasna drummed her fingers on the table, then realized she was doing it to the beat of the celebration above. A pity that the Alethi Lidice frowned upon drums. The Parshendi music was exotic, and she would like to have heard more of its startling complexity. Startling complexity, she thought, like the drummers themselves, actually. I will tell you, Jasna said, if your other services are needed. You move only if I say, no mistakes, no accidents, Liz. For now, you assume the role of a lady's maid to my brother's wife, and that is all. You're the one paying, Liz said. And they called her the Weeper, although she hadn't coined the cognomen. It served her purpose well, since she had secrets to hide. The first was her gender. The second had to do with the eyes of the people that the Weeper killed. It was said that the Weeper gouged them out to proclaim indifference to whether her victims were light-eyed or dark. The truth was that she didn't want anyone to know that the way she killed left corpses with burned-out eye sockets. I will arrange for one of my sister-in-law's maids to be released, Jasna said. You will apply for the position using faked credentials I assume you are capable of producing. You will be hired. It's done then, Liz said, standing and nodding to Jasna. What happened to that slave you were talking about? Jasna asked. I thought you were going to show him off to me. I sold him to a slaver weeks ago. Really? Jasna said. I thought you said he was the best servant you'd ever had. Too good a servant, Liz said. Let's leave it at that. Storming creepy, that one was. Liz shivered visibly, then walked to the door. She hesitated before leaving. Do you know why I like you, Brightness? Well, I suspect it has something to do with my pockets and their proverbial depth. Liz smiled. There is that. I ain't gonna deny it. But you're also different from other light eyes. When others hire me, they turn their noses up to the entire process. They're all too eager to use my services, but they sneer and wring their hands as if they hate being forced to do something so utterly distasteful. Assassination is distasteful, Liz. So is cleaning out chamber pots. I can respect the one employed for such jobs without admiring the job itself. Liz grinned. Remember our first agreement, Jasna said. Always there in the back of my mind, Brightness. Liz slipped out into the hallway, taking her serving man, who had been waiting there, then withdrawing into the night. Jasna sat back, lacing her fingers in front of herself. Their first agreement was that if anyone should come to Liz and offer a contract on any member of Jasna's family, Liz would let Jasna match the offer in exchange for the name of the one who had made it. Liz would do it. Probably. So would the other dozen assassins Jasna dealt with. A repeat customer was always more valuable than a one-off contract, and it was in the best interest of a woman like Liz to have a friend in the government. Jasna's family was safe from the likes of these, unless she herself employed the assassins, of course. Jasna let out a deep sigh, then rose, trying to shrug off the weight she felt bearing her down. Her shadow, didn't move quite quickly enough. Yasna spun on it and narrowed her eyes. She could have sworn. And the other day, when she cast a shadow the wrong way, like was recorded in Waverley's dialogues as a superstitious sign that someone had been cursed. Long days and fatigue, or something else? We will stop right there. So, questions. What would you guys like to know from me? Ooh. All right, in the back.
I have a Wheel of Time question.
Yes.
So a bunch of friends of mine are convinced that Olver was Geidel Kane. And I said he's too old because Kane was at Falma. Can you clarify?
I can confirm that he is not Geidel Kane. Excellent, excellent question. I can confirm it quite easily, though, because Robert Jordan was asked that right before he passed away, and he had said, no, Oliver isn't Geidel Kane. Now, I do know who Geidel Kane is, and I did embed at least one moderately conspicuous clue in the books. So there have been theories on that, and you may maybe Theoryland will help you on it. But yes, you are correct. All right, the gentleman behind you had a question as well.
I was wondering if you could tell us a little about your process when it goes to writing dialogue. How do you put
Writing
yourself in the characters?
Dialogue. Good question. Boy, it is tough. Let's just say that. It is tough, and it really depends on what you're shooting for in the scene. The best dialogue, I feel, is the dialogue that if you left off all the tags from the character speaking, you would still be able to know who is speaking, and you would be able to know their emotional state. That's what really strong dialogue is capable of conveying. Now, we usually don't want to leave the dialogue tags off because we want it to be easy to read as well as powerful. But if you can do that, that's majestic. And so I do suggest practicing writing scenes of dialogue without the tags and asking yourself what is going to distinguish this character's emotional state and what is going to distinguish who is who in this conversation by the way that they approach the conversation. Now, there are a lot of, how should we say, corners you can cut on this that actually start to feel like cliches to me. Like, if you've got a really intelligent character, people naturally start using big, very long words for them. But you'll notice that a lot of really intelligent people don't use long words. And it feels awkward. The way that I've noticed, at least personally, that if someone's very intelligent, my friends who are very, very intelligent, they are quick to the punch, they make a really good argument, and lay out the facts. They actually talk like an essay form, but quickly, with a premise, proof, boom, and hit you fast. And they're great at arguing. They also make connections really fast in ways that ways leave everyone else behind. One of my good friends and roommate in college was on Jeopardy, Ken Jennings. And this is how he and his friends would talk. You get the Quiz Bowl group together, he and his brother and our mutual friend Earl, and they would just start going, and following that conversation was incredibly hard. But there wasn't a big word in there. They would occasionally throw them out, but it's not like you imagine, people will write where there's like all of these words have like 17 syllables and things. Instead, it's different from that. And I personally find that overdoing a person's linguistic quirks can throw people out. This is something I've had to make my own balance with, is how often do you use someone's linguistic quirks and how much do you use their dialect and try to write it. That's a personal choice. I kind of side on the side of less is more. But there's also the decision you have to make is how realistic is your dialogue going to be. I love Joss Whedon films. Their dialogue is not realistic. People don't talk like they do in Joss Whedon films. But I love watching those, and I would rather write my books like that, even though it's a shade unrealistic, because there's no ums, there's no, people saying, like I just did. There's none of that. Everyone has a quick quip. Even the dumb guy has a quick quip. It's just a dumb quick quip. And it makes for really engaging, fun dialogue. But you have to decide. There are other people who would prefer to write very realistically and very kind of gritty, real language to draw you into the scene and to give this sense of immersion. You will have to decide what that means to you. Sitting around and listening to how people talk and writing it down as they talk can help you with this, and then you can decide which level you want. You kind of take that and then compare it to different things you have seen in books and decide where you want your dialogue to be. If you have other writing questions, I do have a writing podcast called Writing Excuses. If any of you haven't listened to it, it's very fun. You don't have to do the whole podcast thing. I found that I tell people, hey, you can listen to my podcast. They're like, I don't have an iPod. Well, you just go in your browser and you push play. That's how a podcast works these days. You can do the whole download thing. I've never done it. You just push play. And it's 15 minutes of writing advice every week, so you might find that useful. All right, over here.
Is there going to be another Alloy of Law book?
Oh, good question. So let's run down the big list of sequels that people are wanting. Big list of sequels. So, your question was about Alloy of Law. For those who are not familiar with it, when I pitched Mistborn to my editor, originally I pitched it as 3 trilogies. An epic fantasy trilogy, which was going to be this awesome epic fantasy heist novel thing. And then there was going to be an urban fantasy 1980s level technology techno thriller where the magic was still around, but it was happening in a modern day where the mythology and of everything that happened in the old trilogy became the foundation for religion in the modern day. And then I was going to do a science fiction trilogy in which it was a space opera, and the magic system, Allomancy and Ferrochemy, had become the means by which space travel is possible. I realized as I started working on the Stormlight Archive that I did not want to have 2 series going that required a lot of continuity remembering between books for readers. By this I mean, I didn't want, like, when Words of Radiance comes out, it's very in-depth. It starts the day after the Way of Kings came out. Words of Radiance is March, by the way. It starts just like a couple days later. Everything that happened in the first book is still maintained continuity in the next book. And there are things I'm embedding in one book that are going to be very important in the middle of the next book and things like this. It's a very in-depth series, like the Wheel of Time was. I didn't want to have 2 of those going at once. I wanted to try writing some books where you could read one, and then if it had been a few years when the sequel came out, you didn't necessarily have to reread the first one in order to pick up the sequel. And that was where Alloy of Law came from. It is my experiment. I did 1910 level technology in between the 2 trilogies that I had plotted out in order to do something that was more, it's a detective novel. It's, I hope, still very fun and very deep, but at the end of the book, when you pick up the next one, I want to be able to bring you up to speed very quickly. And so I am working on a sequel to that. It's called Shadows of Self. And it should be, I actually just got an offer on it from Tor. They want to publish it a year after Words of Radiance, with the hope being that we can do the sequel to Words of Radiance that fall. So, Words of Radiance 2014, it's March. Shadows of Self 2015, March. And then Christmas time, the sequel to Words of Radiance, which right now right now I'm calling it Skybreaker, but we'll see if I go forward with that title. So yes. The big old list, therefore, Steelheart sequel. I'm trying to get back to doing 2 books a year. Last year I had none, and this year I had 3. I don't really like that balance, right? For many years I did 1 longer book and 1 shorter book. So next year my goal is to do Words of Radiance and Firefight, the sequel to Steelheart. Alcatraz 5, I don't know. I had to buy the rights back to that from the publisher. They didn't want to finish the series. This is my middle grade, my goofy middle grade series. I will finish it someday when I need a break from some other book. Probably it will be unexpected, but I will finish it and get the last book out there. Other things like Legion and whatnot that I have my novellas. I'm not promising any sequels anytime soon. They might pop out. These are things that happen in between other books, so you might see them. Rhythmatist will have a sequel as well. I'll probably, we'll look at when I can do that. I want it to be the next YA book, probably after Firefight. And so we'll see. We'll see when that happens. So, Elantris and Warbreaker, no promises. Sorry. I've got contracts for things, and I kind of have to start wrapping up series rather than doing volumes and series that aren't actually series, and I really haven't, indicated would be series. There will be sequels someday, but let's get some things wrapped up first. Along with this question usually comes the question of films, and my film agent was just here. He met me. on the way in. I have signed film deals on quite a number of my properties. I have no news because, you know, you guys live in LA. You know the film stuff probably. It's like there's no news until something finally happens, right? It sits and simmers. And everybody tells you, oh, everything's going great, everything's going great, everything's going great. But that means nothing's happening until they call you and say, guess what? This director's on board. We're actually making it. And that just happens like that, it seems to me. And I have not yet had that happen. So, if your uncle's Joss Whedon, have him call. But yeah, so we are doing a Mistborn video game. It is slotted right now for Christmas 2015. Got pushed back because of next-gen systems. All right, other questions? Yes?
So it's kind of a long setup, but so, and trying to be as least spoilerific as possible. You have a character in a book who posits that technology is run by evil demons. Okay, and then you had a Writing Excuses podcast about I.E. Demon.
Yes.
It sort of seemed to, as soon as I read that line, that was the first thing that popped in my mind. You told the story about how you came up with Steelheart.
Right.
So I wondering if you had any other little tidbits or any other little stories about how you've come up with a specific idea.
Right.
Something
right.
that may...
It really, how do I come up with specific ideas? It depends a lot on the book. It depends a lot on the story. A lot of things just pop out. It's hard to trace. Like, for instance, Ferrochemy from the Mistborn books. If you haven't read the Mistborn books, there are people who can take up a piece of metal and store an attribute about themselves in it. Like, for instance, their strength. And they become, you know, half as strong while they're storing this, and then they can tap that strength out later and become 1.5 times as strong for an equal amount of time. And this came from me being in a high school, being an insomniac, and being exhausted every day at school and thinking, why can't I sleep at night? I'm so tired right now. I wish I had a device I could just like store up my sleepiness and then later on take out that sleepiness and calm. And so that became a magic system 15 years later. So it's hard to trace a lot of these things, if that makes any sense. The tensors, which are the primary technology, it's really just magic in Steelheart. It's really a fantasy novel, even though it looks like science fiction. Because I don't describe the science of it. It's a soft science fiction. How about that? The tensors came from just me imagining. You know, I was turning the world to steel. I was giving Steelheart the Midas touch, but, you know, with steel. And I wanted something that interacted really interesting with that environment. And the tensors were developed as a way to interact, a way to have a cool way that the characters were making use of the fact that their entire city had been turned to steel. So sometimes it's out of necessity for the story like that, where I'm like, they need to have something that magnifies this. I don't want the city to just be steel. I want it to be a plot point and useful and detrimental to the characters in interesting ways. And so I developed something that way. Other times it is something that just I've been working on for years, like Ferrochemy, that I plug into a story and I say, wow, that interacts very interestingly with a character I've designed. So I want to do this, and ooh, we put in this little subplot that I've been working on for years and haven't found a place for, such as wanting to tell a story about a surgeon in a more primitive culture, and you know, Kaladin kind of being born out of that concept. That was a character I've been working on for a while, and then worked into the story.
Cool.
Other questions? Anyone in the back? Yes.
2 parts. One, have you listened to the Way of Kings audiobook? And
Yes, I have.
Part 2, do you feel like Michael and Kate's narration transforms the characters?
Yeah, I really like Michael and Kate. They are my favorite audiobook narrators, and I asked for them by name for Way of Kings, just because, you know, the Wheel of Time was so foundational in me growing up, and the Wheel of Time are the audiobooks I've listened to the most. And so I love the way that they can do. I personally like narrators. Everyone has a different philosophy on narrators. I personally like the ones that do enough distinguishing of characters that you could tell someone different is speaking, but who don't go overboard. Some people like it very stale reading, no characterization at all. Some people like it completely performed with different actors doing every voice. And I like this kind of middle road. And I think Michael and Kate are fantastic at that, which is why I asked for them. All right, there's a question over here.
Yeah, when you're coming up with a new series or book, I was curious about which comes first when you're developing it? Do you flesh out the whole like world, or is it the magic system that comes first? And think, I want to use that to.
Right, world, magic system, character. You know, I'm usually developing them all separately. I describe them as like atoms that are bouncing around in my head, and I know I've got a novel when they connect in interesting ways and transform one another. The best example I can give of this is Mistborn, because I was very conscious when I was doing it of this happening. I had developed the idea for a plot where the hero who was prophesied to save the world failed. I developed that separately. That's just an idea I come up with. Pharaoh came in, I talked about it. It was an idea I'd come up with. The idea of wanting to do a heist novel in a fantasy world was a separate idea I'd been working with. The character of Kelsier was a separate idea I'd been working with. And then these things all combined and came together and formed a book. That is the way it usually happens. However, sometimes, like with Steelheart, there's a founding idea, this premise of the world where there are no heroes, and what story do I want to tell in that? In that case, the premise came first, from there came the character of David, and from there came the development of the magic and the setting in order to fit the story I wanted to tell. And I've done it both ways. Yes, in the hat.
How do you come up with the twists at the end of novels? Like
How do
for
I come up
Steelheart,
with the twists at the end of novels? I can't usually approach writing a book unless I know I have a good ending. I'm an outliner. That's a characteristic of an outliner. Some other writers are not outliners, and for them, if they know their book too much, they feel like it writes the life out of the book. They kind of have to just write and see where it goes. And both ways are valid, but I like to have a good twist. And so when I'm imagining a book, I'm trying to determine, what is the story going to be? What's exciting, interesting about it? It doesn't have to be a twist, but often it is. What is going to make me interested in this book? What am I going to write toward? What's going to be exciting about it? These things just are during my outlining process. It's usually I turn on cool music and I go for a walk, and I'll spend days doing that, being like, all right, what is this book? Let's form this book in my head. Usually I work backward with goals and interesting scenes, and then I decide what needs to be in the book in order to found those scenes to make them work. Yes?
What is the Elantris publishing story?
What is the Elantris publishing story? Well, it's a long story. Oh wait, I read epic fantasy. You guys are used to me going on and on. No, the Elantris publishing story is when I was first decided I wanted to write books, someone gave me a piece of advice, I can't even remember who it was, who said that your first 5 books are usually terrible. And so I said, well, I'm going to write 6 then. It actually is very freeing to me. For some people, this worries them. For me, it was very freeing because I thought, oh, I do not have to be any good when I start. I can be bad when I begin. And so I wrote 5 very kind of experimental books. I wrote 2 epic fantasies. I wrote 1 comedic fantasy, kind of along the lines of something like Bob Asprin's books. I don't know if you've ever heard of those, the myth books, something along those lines. I wrote 1 kind of space opera-ish, sort of adventure science fiction. I wrote 1 cyberpunk-ish, dark, dystopian science fiction book. And at the end of doing all of this, I decided that the epic fantasy, which I kind of suspected, was what I really loved. This is what I wanted to do, but I wanted to try all these things, right? An experiment. And so the next book I wrote, I said, I'm going to write down, okay, now we're going to just focus on epic fantasy. And this is what I'm going to do. And I started with book number 6, which was Elantris. And the following books were Dragonsteel and White Sand, if you know my history. These are, those are both unpublished, but those are the next 2 books I wrote. I went from there to Mythwalker, which eventually chunks of that became Warbreaker. And so I was doing this, I kept writing books. I was working on my 13th novel. And by this point, I had the advice of go and learn the industry, meet editors, try and actually actively treat this like a business. Don't just kind of sit around hoping you'll get published. Go to where the editors are, talk to them, find out what types of books they're publishing right now and what made them excited about those books. Learn their names and send, not just blindly saying, dear acquisitions editor, send books saying, dear Moshe Fader, I met you at this convention. You had all this great advice for me. Thank you so much. Here is my book, which I mentioned to you. I hope that you enjoy it. You know, if you do, you find me here. That sort of cover letter instead of the dear random person, here's my book. And I spent 4 or 5 years doing this before eventually someone, I was working on the 13th book, which was The Way of Kings. when someone, it was Moshe, he's my editor now, called me back and said he'd read Elantris, he wanted to buy it. Just one of those blind calls that you get. Like, I'd actually sent it to him 18 months earlier, and I'd completely given up on it. I'm like, 18 months? The editor's lost that. It's gone. And I had changed phones since then, and I'd moved somewhere else, and so he found me by Googling me and finding my grad student page, which happened to have my phone number on it because I was going to start teaching very soon, so it was there for my students, and so he could call me and get a hold of me and left me a voicemail message. Just said, "Hi, I hope this is the right Brandon Sanderson, because if it is, I want to buy your book." So yeah, after being stuck, this actually has happened to me twice in my life where I've gotten these voicemail messages. Because the other one was Harriet, Robert Jordan's widow, leaving me a message, said, "Hi, this is Robert Jordan's widow. Please call me back. I want to talk to you about something." So listen to your voicemail messages. So I called him back. I by then had met several agents, and there was one I particularly liked. So I called this person afterward and said, "I have an offer on one of my books. Would you be willing to look at it?" He went and liked the book, and it was basically free money for him. So yes, he said, "Yes, I'll represent you." And he argued for this great contract, and the book got published. That is, I'm the last wave that the whole self-publishing and ebooks thing did not influence. The world is a very different place right now, and I'm not sure if what I did is even viable anymore. It seems like a lot more people these days are breaking in by doing their own books, like on the Nook first, and then drawing the attention of a publisher, and then doing the print editions. But I think the old school way is still working. It's just that the new school way is like enough new people are breaking in that way that there are fewer people breaking in the old way. But yeah, so there you are. Yes?
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
You just spoke about coming up with ideas and going
Yes.
out and listening to cool music.
Yes.
I want to know what falls under Brandon Sanderson's
Cool music.
Yeah.
Let's see. It's anything that really just evokes powerful emotion in me. I really like Daft Punk a lot. For whatever reason, I like very good soundtracks. Michael Kamen's soundtracks are fantastic. If you haven't ever listened to his. Whatever is just really powerful. I actually really like mashups, which is weird, but I love mashups. So there's one I posted on my Facebook a little bit back that if you saw it, it was who was it? It was Taylor Swift mashed up with Korn, and it's awesome. But yeah, it just depends on what kind of epic music, whatever is feeling epic to me at the time, I will listen to, and things like that. When I'm actually writing, I use a Pandora, just Pandora station that is mostly instrumental and soundtracks. When I'm imagining a scene and I'm not writing, I will listen to things with words as long as it strikes me as powerful. So, yeah. All right, in the back right here.
What are your favorite fantasy novels?
What are my favorite fantasy novels? Shadow Rising by Robert Jordan, Dragon's Bane by Barbara Hamley, Tigana by Guy Gavriel Kay, The White Dragon by Anne McCaffrey. Let's see if I really liked Name of the Wind, fantastic book. I read Brent Weeks' work, and I like that. I really like The 100,000 Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin. If you haven't read that, it was a really great book. And she's a fantastic writer. So I read a lot of things. I like to read outside the genre and inside the genre. And I am a fantasy junkie, and so I really like to know my genre and know what people are writing. So I try to read a little bit of everybody. Oh, Terry Pratchett. I forgot Terry. Terry is fantastic. If you haven't read Pratchett, I hadn't read him for many years. I tried his first book, and I was like, this is okay. What I have come to learn is you can't start with the first book because he's okay with his first book. He's good for the next few books, and he gets brilliant after that. And so the nice thing is he has these like character through lines. The first book is about different characters than like the fifth book. You can start with, I suggest, the Guards, which is a great place to start, or The Truth, which is about the invention of a printing press and someone trying to start a newspaper in a fantasy world, and it's hilarious. Or I really have liked the Moist books lately. Moist von, what's his name, Lipwick? Yeah, who's, the first one is called, not making money, Going Postal. And any of those are first books by about a character. The Truth is just a standalone. There's not even any more about that character. So you can start with those if you haven't read them. They're fantastic. And if you haven't read Tigana, Really, best standalone epic fantasy novel ever written. Guy Gabriel Kay. It's the guy who wrote the Silmarillion. He did for Tolkien what I did for Robert Jordan. He just didn't get his name on the cover. It's in the acknowledgments only. But it's kind of one of these loosely guarded secrets in fantasy. He is fantastic, and he writes just beautiful prose. So, Taigata. So there you go. All right, let's do one more question right here. Yes. That's right. 2 more questions then. Okay. How do I come up with my magic systems? Let me answer this very quickly and suggest, since we don't have time for me to go through it, I've written 3 essays on this. And I posted them all on my website last week with links to the first 2. I posted the 3rd one. They're called Sanderson's Laws of Magic. Very humbly named after myself. So if you read those, it will tell you everything that I have learned about writing magic systems.
And then the other part is you kind of listed some of the powers of cumulative in the U.S. Alley of Law.
Yeah.
Are you going to go into depth on any of those newer ones?
Yes. I will eventually go into depth, but I have to save some things for later in the series. But since you brought it up, I will do my next reading from the sequel to Alloy of Law. So let me do this. I have a little chunk of this book written, not the whole book, but by far not the whole book. But I have enough written to be dangerous. So to have my publisher be like, I really want to have a contract for that just to be safe. That's what publishers are like. They want to have everything under contract so that they don't wake up and find that you published it somewhere else or something like that. When Robert Jordan passed away, he had a contract for, I think, for 5 more books beyond the last Wheel of Time book, something like that, maybe 4. So anyway, here is from Shadows of Self. If you haven't read Alloy of Law, this won't be major spoilers. They are 1910 era-ish technology. I mean, there are differences because it's not our world. Kind of detective novels with a Western bent. They star a guy named Waxillium, who moved out into the frontier for many years, leaving behind his house, and then came back when he inherited, and is actually kind of a lord in charge, and so he had to come back into the big city after living out in the frontier for a long time. So here we go. I figure I should write one of these things, the book read. To tell my side, not the side the historians will tell for me. I doubt they'll get it right, and I don't know that I'd like them to anyhow. Wax tapped the book with the end of his pencil, then scribbled down a note to himself on a separate page. I'm thinking of inviting the Boris brothers to the wedding, Steris said, from the couch opposite the one Wax sat upon. He grunted, still reading. I know Sayes doesn't approve of what I've done, the book continued. But what did he expect me to do, knowing what I know? The Boris brothers, Steris continued, they're acquaintances of yours, aren't they? I shot their father, Wax said, not looking up. Twice. I couldn't let it die, the book read. It's not right. Hemalurgy is good now, I figure. Are they likely to try to kill you? Steris asked. Boris Jr. swore to drink my blood, Wax said. Boris III, and yes, he's the brother of Boris Jr., don't ask. He swore to, what was it? Eat my toes? He's not a clever man. We can use it, the book read. We should, shouldn't we? I'll just put them on the list then, Steris said. Wax sighed, looking up from the book. You're going to invite my mortal enemies, he said dryly, to our wedding. We have to invite someone, Steris said. She sat with her blonde hair up in a bun, her stacks of papers for the wedding arrangements settled around her like subjects at court. Her blue flowered dress was fashionable without being the least bit daring, and her prim hat clung to her hair so tightly it might as well have been nailed in place. I'm certain there are better choices for invitations than people who want me dead, Wax said. I hear family members are traditional. As a point of fact, I believe your remaining family members actually do want you dead. She had him there. Well, yours don't. Not that I've heard anyway. If you need to fill out the wedding party, invite more of them. I've invited all of my family as would be proper, and all of my acquaintances that merit the regard. She reached to the side, taking out a sheet of paper. You, however, have given me only 2 names of people to invite. Wayne and a woman named Renette, whom you noted probably wouldn't try to shoot you at your own wedding. Very unlikely, Wax agreed. Renette hasn't tried to kill me in years, not seriously at least. Steris sighed, setting the sheet aside. Steris, Wax said, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be flippant. Renette will be fine. We joke about her, but she's a good friend. She won't ruin the wedding, I promise. Then who will? Excuse me? I have known you for the better part of a year now, Lord Waxillian, Steris said. I can accept you for who you are, but I am under no illusions. Something will happen at our wedding. A villain will burst in, guns firing, or we'll discover explosives in the altar. Perhaps the priest will try to assassinate you. It will happen. I'm merely trying to prepare for it. You're serious, aren't you? Wax asked, smiling. You're actually thinking of inviting my enemies so you can plan for a disruption. I've sorted them by threat level and ease of access, Steris said, shuffling through her papers. Wait, Wax said, rising and walking over. He leaned down next to her, looking over her shoulder at the papers. Each sheet contained a detailed biography. Ape Manton, the Dasher Boys, Russ, Rick Stranger. I'd forgotten about him. Where did you get these? Your exploits are a matter of public record, Steris said. One that is of increasing interest to people. How long did you spend on this? Wax asked, flipping through the pages in the stack. I wanted to be thorough. Besides, this sort of thing helps me think, and I wanted to know what you had spent your life doing. That was actually kind of sweet, in a bizarre Steris sort of way. Invite Douglas Venture, he said. He's kind of a friend, but he can't hold his liquor. You can count on him making a disturbance at the after-party. Excellent, Steris said. And the other 37 seats in your section? Invite the leaders among the seamstresses and dock workers of my house, Wax said, and the captains of the constable watches of the various octans. It will be a nice gesture. Very well, Steris said. If you want me to help more with the wedding planning, no, this is the perfect sort of thing to occupy me, though someday I would like to know what is in that little book that you peruse so often. Aye. The front door to the mansion burst open down below, and booted feet thumped up the steps. A moment later, the door to the study slammed open, and Wayne all but tumbled in. Radiance, the house butler, stood apologetically just behind. Wiry and of medium height, Wayne had a round, clean-shaven face and, as usual, wore his old Russ clothing, though Steris had pointedly sent him new clothes on at least 3 different occasions. Wayne, Wax said, you could try the doorbell sometime. Nah, that warns the butler. Which is kind of the point. Beady little buggers, Wayne said, shutting the door on Radiance. Can't trust them. Look, Wax, we've got to go. The marksman has made his move. Finally, Wax thought. Let me grab my coat. Wayne nodded, glancing towards Steris. Hello, crazy, he said, nodding to her. Hello, idiot, she said, nodding back. Wax buckled his gun belt over his fine city suit with vest and cravat, then threw on his duster. Let's go, he said, checking his ammo. Wayne pushed his way out the door, barreling down the stairs. Wax paused by Steris' couch. A man must have his hobbies, she said, raising another sheet of paper and inspecting it. I accept yours, Lord Waxillian, but do try to avoid being shot in the face, as we have wedding portraits to sit for this evening. I'll remember that. Keep an eye on my sister out there, Steris said. Well, this is a dangerous chase, Wax said, hastening to the door. I doubt Marcy will be involved. If you think that, then your powers of investigation are suspect. It's a dangerous chase, so she'll find a way to be involved. Wax paused by the door. He glanced back at Steris, and she looked up, meeting his eyes. It felt as if there should be something more to their parting, a send-off of some sort. Fondness? Steris seemed to sense it too, but neither said anything. The relationship was one of convenience. That was that. Wax tipped his head back, taking a shot of whiskey and metal flakes. Then he charged through the doorway and threw himself over the balcony railing. Steel burned alive in his stomach, and he slowed himself with a push on the silver inlays of the marble floor of the entryway, hitting with a thump of boots on stone. Radiance opened the front door for him as he leapt out to join Wayne at the couch for the ride too. Wax froze on the steps down to the street. What the hell is that? Motor car, Wayne said from the back seat of the vehicle. We will stop there. So, before we go forward, I have a few things I want to announce. The first of which is a thank you to the bookstore. Let's give them a round.